Hello everyone, my name is Ian Garcia, this is Devotional Criticism, and welcome to a brand new year of the New Movie Diary. This is a cinema criticism series in which I review recent, new, and up-and-coming film releases and attempt to give you the straight facts about them, in my humble opinion. And for all of you who are not new to the New Movie Diary and are wondering where the hell I've been, why I haven't updated the channel in some 3 months, I'm just going to level with you. I was tired and I just had too much to do. What do you want? I gotta work for a living and I'm mainly just doing this for the love of the game anyway, hence the devotional criticism thing. But I missed a lot of you loyal subscribers and am happy to say that I'm well rested and unbothered enough to hit the ground running with the slim pickings on offer as distributors largely decide to keep the deck clear for the last straggling prestige projects of the holiday season to be the big picture for most patrons of the cinema ahead of award season. All exactly the sort of stuff I couldn't give less of a shit about, not that I haven't had my own fun with my top 20 lists of 2025. Check the links in the description. I'd love to have a more comprehensive critical picture of last year, or really any year. I'd love to not have a cold right now, but I can promise you that my snapshot of 2025 is going to include a lot of smaller profile or even just good popcorn stuff that I think deserves its own space of longer consideration and meditation. It's generally those kinds of flicks that tend to stand out in my memory anyway and look forward to a new year of film going for. In the words of Woody Guthrie, the big ones are made up by the little kind, so why don't we drink a cup o' kindness for Auld Lang Syne and see if bypassing under the radar of the seasonal prestige picture fanfare, we can cast a proper spotlight on just two such little kinds of flicks that are having the most ignominious rollout under the circumstances, January generally being seen as a financial dead zone and cultural purgatory for any distributors that have just got a pickup or two lying around that they may have been holding on to for some 2 years and simply don't know what to do with. And that's most certainly the case for our first official new US release of the new year, We Bury the Dead, an Australian zombie thriller written and directed by Zach Hilditch, which had its premiere at South by Southwest all the way back in March of last year. Of course, by that time, the ad campaign for Danny Boyle and Alex Garland's 28 Years Later was already in full swing, and even with the summer of 2025 long surrendering to a frigid winter, it's impossible to not consider We Bury the Dead in the shadow of not only that film, but of course the original 28 Days Later from all the way back in 2002. Like that now classic neo-zombie survival flick and its legacy sequel, We Bury the Dead is arguably neither an apocalyptic or a post-apocalyptic film. I hate to spoil the original 28 Days Later for you whippersnappers out there who haven't gotten around to seeing it yet, but the whole genius of the world that Garland and Boyle have now crafted over the past 25 years is that it deceptively posits itself as an apocalyptic horror film because of its focus on the limited, desperate subjectivity of its ensemble cast. But where there is in the first film, and compounding with 28 Years Later, a profound, ongoing, dramatic irony to the fact that the world has not been remade or wiped clean by this apparently apocalyptic event. Rather, the world has simply gone on as usual around the critical zone of interest, Greater Britain and Ireland now finding themselves completely abandoned to self-cannibalism as planes continue to fly overhead, foreign militaries continue to run standard drills in their waters. Like 28 Days Later, We Bury the Dead is not a post-apocalyptic, but a cataclysmic film, in which the action is contained to the island of Tasmania, where the testing by the United States Navy of a novel thermonuclear weapon leads to a massive explosion that leaves virtually every inhabitant of the state dead. The film then follows Daisy Ridley as Ava, an American woman who joins a military-supported volunteer body retrieval unit intended to collect, document and mass bury the casualties of this disaster. Yes, the rumors and chatter in international media are true that a small number of the casualties are spontaneously coming back online, coming back to life, zombies. So, no, not a carbon copy of Boyle and Garland's world by any means, and it must be said, We Bury the Dead starts off as a relatively ingenious crafting of a decidedly somber disaster film around the skeletal structure of a routine zombie movie. The expository depictions of the disaster itself are very effective in terms of their stark realization, and Hilditch and his production team and his post-production team have clearly taken great critical pains to make sure that even the smallest technical details of such an event, specifically the accidental detonation of a giant bomb, what that would look like from the parts of Tasmania that are still engulfed in fire, from the sheer intense heat of the flashbang to CCTV footage depicting the complete evaporation of everything closest to the detonation site, to the depiction of suburbs with reflectively painted houses and yards clear of debris, only slightly burned, whereas dead bodies are discovered with only superficial boils and burns, to individuals who have simply been put to an eternal rest, like the sheer force of the shockwave itself just turned off the switch in their brains. These are all magnificent details of a low-budget production that took great pains to realize the preamble to a zombie film as a disaster with all of its own small, subtle attendant horrors, and which successfully contributes to a genuine sense of tragedy and not just shallow shock in anticipation of cliche zombie action. But We Bury the Dead also isn't particularly one note in terms of that tragic disaster film perspective, especially as Ava finds herself ironically teamed up with Clay, another volunteer played by Bretton Thwaites, who she actually ends up working really well with and developing a rapport because he doesn't seem to particularly care. He's just there to bust up houses, drag out bodies, and take the money for it. And it's with the development between these characters that you start to see Hilditch as a screenwriter acknowledging the capacity of people to really inure themselves to even the worst of disasters when they feel like they have a significant enough motive or really just a deep enough misanthropy to not really care. It's a compelling dramatic nuance that also happens to lead to some moments of really quite effective offbeat humor. And I can't imagine how frustrating it must have been working on this special, small, but really rather inventive zombie flick all the way back in 2024, have it ready for festivals a year later, only to find out that not only is the special, small, really rather inventive zombie flick from decades ago that your film is already doomed to be contrasted by, not only are the original creators of it mounting a high-profile legacy sequel for the same summer, but even if you wait for 2026, those limey prats, Danny Boyle and Alex Garland, also already had a spin-off sequel ready to steal your shine 2 weeks into f***ing January. Like, I would be so mad. Like, I would probably be like the zombies in Hilditch's movies, like staring into blank space, wide-eyed for a long time, start grinding my teeth. I'd even go so far as to argue that there's a lot more ingenious chopping and screwing of the zombie film in terms of narrative than there is in 28 years later. But some early reviews going all the way back to We Bury the Dead's original festival run seem to chalk it up to, oh, the film is a victim of the fact that Hilditch still just kind of finds himself cruising into typical zombie film stuff. But I'd argue that even that's going a little too far. I think even the more run-of-the-mill zombie mechanics in this film are pulled off pretty well. I especially appreciate how Hilditch really strives to keep those more typical moments as marginal to the drama as possible in order to maintain a sense of the film's unique mixture of tragedy and quirky dramatic irony driven by the two leads and their chemistry with one another, where even to the extent that there is more zombie stuff as the film film goes on, it's deployed in a very deliberate and sometimes even deliberately anticlimactic way, so that it's more of a punctuation of a character beat, especially Ridley's heroine, as we start to learn more and more about her and her motivations and the dimensions and contours of her seemingly straightforward character. But that's where I think the problem actually comes in, because even when Hilditch is finally ready for the climactic twist that suddenly reveals more about this character than we had privy to before, it just isn't that big a reveal, and there even comes to be this feeling as We Bury the Dead is finally starting to basically just cruise to a steady stop, that suddenly all of that ingeniousness goes out the door, and the problem doesn't so much become that Hilditch can't effectively spin the plate of putting new spins on typical zombie fare, but rather that he can't really do the same thing for just the character drama itself. The technical ingenuity with genre cliches seems to be his exact forte, but for this heroine who really doesn't get any more to do, doesn't do much that's particularly unexpected or defies our previously built up expectations. Ridley, who is a fine actor, she seems to have so few directions to go in that even after this climactic revelation about her, it feels as though she's still simply locked into this meandering mopiness. We Bury the Dead, despite the very active title, is passive to a fault, and so what ingenious touches it might have in spades goes out under its own weight, like a zombie dragging a compound fracture in its ankle behind it, the final nail of mediocrity being driven into the lid, that eye-rolling dump of melancholy exposition between Ava and Clay at the end, where it's like, gee, movie, thanks for crafting this moody atmospheric journey that I was at least fine with before ruining it all by popping the last balloon of mystery that you had. Non-monster characters are just like monster characters. The less you show, the more evocative they become. I'm not trying to be too hard on it as far as ignominious January horror pickups go. This is certainly not a fuck you, it's January situation. But I think I'm okay to give We Bury the Dead a fine 3 out of 5. With that, I'm tapping out. Thank you so much for sticking through this whole video, and please don't